all of you. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about a very important topic. We want to think about self-care. And if you are like most of us, you probably have not been giving that a lot of thought lately because you've been so busy caring for others. So we're hoping that today's webinar will truly give you a few moments just to reflect on your own self-care. Let me take just a minute and introduce you to our two speakers today. We're so excited to be partnered with the American Psychological Association for this webinar. First, I will introduce Raquel Halfond. She is the Director of Clinical Practice Guidelines in Practice Research and Policy, Practice Directorate at the American Psychological Association. She is also a clinical child psychologist. She received her doctorate in clinical psychology from Virginia Commonwealth University and completed her APA-approved clinical internship at Children's Hospital Los Angeles and was a postdoctoral fellow at Harbor UCLA Medical Center. Our second presenter, who's equally impressive, is Lynn Bufka. Lynn is the Associate Executive Director for Practice Research and Policy at the American Psychological Association. She received her PhD in psychology from Boston University. Her areas of professional interest include healthcare policy, practice patterns and trends, professional development, adult anxiety disorders, and cross-cultural issues in psychology. And before she joined APA in 2002, she served as the Associate Director of the Doctoral Clinical Training Program and Director of Practice Training at Boston University's Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders. I want to thank both of our presenters for being with us today. We truly appreciate you bringing your expertise on this very important subject. And Kelsey, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Linda. Raquel, I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share so you can take that over.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. We're really happy to be here, and I'll let Lynn kick it off.
Okay, I can't hear Lynn. Give me just a second to make sure she's not muted.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, we hear you. Terrific.
Excellent, excellent. I kept trying to hit the mic button to unmute myself and couldn't do it. So thanks for your patience, everyone. I'm so excited to see how many people are participating in this webinar and where you're all from. And my heart particularly is happy to see all the people from Michigan. That's where I was born and raised. So a special shout out to everyone there. But then I'm also seeing all these other wonderful places around the world that both well around the US and actually places around the world that are equally wonderful, I know, and have their own charm. So welcome to all of you. As said, I'm Lynn Bufka, one of the psychologists on staff, particular expertise in stress and anxiety, so particularly fitting for this time in our lives. Also, I'm a mom, so have some personal experiences with some of the family kinds of issues that we're all contending with as well. But you know, one of the challenges right now for all of us, wherever we have faced and will be facing various degrees of stay-at-home orders, physical distancing is what we like to call it, not social distancing, to reduce the spread of COVID-19. We also know that there's significant challenges for people on the front lines who are providing health care on a daily basis to people with COVID and to other health conditions, and all the people who are in grocery stores, delivery personnel, who are encountering and interacting with people everywhere. They are at more risk for developing the disease as well, experiencing increased distress in this time. There's also very specific needs that are impacting families and women right now, in particular with COVID. And one of the things that makes all of this so distressing is there's no real end in sight. This is not something that we know when things will go back to whatever normal is, right? We don't know when things will sort of change and how we adjust. So we are continually trying to figure out how do we adapt and respond to the current kinds of situations that we're faced with, and do so in a way that allows us to most effectively address what is happening in our lives, but also do the best to take care of ourselves, to take care of our responsibilities, and to do the work that we need to do. So with that in mind, Raquel and I are going to talk about some of the very particular things that we can all do in order to enhance our own capacity to deal with the situations that we're all facing right now. And it's different for each of us in one way or another. And some of these things are very applicable to families, to children, and we'll try to talk about those kinds of things as well. So if there's people that you are working with that you can share this with, we'll try to think about how to best talk about it in a way that makes it relevant across ages and populations. So with that introduction, I'm going to have Raquel go ahead and speak next.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. And again, I'm really happy to be here today. I'm, in addition to a licensed clinical psychologist, I specialize in particular in children and families. So this was particularly relevant for me. And then, as Lynn said, I'm also a mom. So right there with many of you on the parenting front. So there's some really basic foundation things that we can do to support our mental health for us, for our parents, and just in our children, the entire family, really. These are things that are basic, but it gets so easy, and when you're caught up in the stress and everything going on, to let them slip, and they can really have a big impact. So, number one, sleep. This is really foundational to our physical and our mental health. So it's recommended for adults that you got about 7 to 8 hours of sleep, ideally, in an ideal world. I know particularly parents with young children, babies, that's especially tricky. And then when you look at children and adolescents, it really is even higher than that. And it depends on the age. So the really, really little ones, they're in that high range. You see that range there's 8 to 16 hours, but the really little guys need even more as they get a little bit older towards teenagers. According to the American Academy of Pediatrics, they need, quite not much real little ones, but still quite a bit. And a few just basic tips is trying to limit the use of electronics, at bedtime and when you first wake up, and really interfere with the ability to sleep. And also try to limit it at nighttime, and this is hard, your intake of news and watching the news or listening to the news right when you go to bed or first thing in the morning. Next, very foundational activity, physical activity. There's a recommendation to have at least 60 minutes a day of physical activity. Most people don't get this. It's tricky, and especially with being at home, many of us are telecommuting, or we're watching children. It's hard to get out and exercise, but it can really be beneficial. And there's different ways that you can try to do it at home if there's a safe environment to walk, or if the kid's in a stroller, do exercise videos, walking in nature, keeping a physical distance. Next, nutrition. And again, this can be a tricky one because when we're stressed, many of us tend to go for those carbs and just eat the more that sugary processed stuff, which is comforting, but overall, not as good for us. So just being mindful of dietary guidelines, trying to broadly eat more plant-based, less processed foods, staying hydrated, just watching your use of substances. And then fourth, social connection, hugely important. And many people will say, they use the term social distancing, but we at APA like to use the term physical distancing because it's really important to still be socially connected, even if you are not physically together. And then you can utilize different ways to stay connected. But, technology, you can do a game night, book club. You can schedule a check-in, schedule, with a good friend of yours, say, hey, let's plan a phone call at, this day, this time, when the kids are in bed or what have you. And it's nice to talk about things other than COVID. I think all of us have a natural tendency to want to just talk about COVID because it's so big on the brain right now, but it's nice to talk about other things as well. So overall, this is just a picture of all these various components contributing to well-being, just thinking about filling your buckets and all these different buckets. You've got thinking about your purpose and trying to engage your brain, creativity, spirituality, occupational, emotional, all these different pieces together. Filling these buckets helps contribute to overall well-being. Another big one, and again, this is a tricky one, but trying to limit your exposure to news. And I know for me, I had to crack down on this for myself. I just, the temptation is to really, especially, a month or so ago, really just dive into that news and just read and watch and listen to everything that's going on. And it can really, it's good to stay informed, but it can also contribute to stress levels and really increasing stress. So try to take control of general media exposure as well as social media exposure. So feeling like, you're becoming really reactionary, do you need to disconnect? If you're on Facebook, if maybe a lot of people are posting things and it's stressing you out, maybe just take a little break for a while and disconnect. And of course, obviously there are, positive benefits to social media, such as connecting with people, but just the idea is just to be aware and mindful of its impact on you personally, on your family, and especially, think about with children in particular, their exposure and what they're reading, and check in with them and correct, if they're getting misinformation, perhaps social media, make sure you just check with them and try to correct it. And we encourage being, an ambassador of kindness and connection in this difficult time. So again, going back to this, physical distancing is not the same as isolation, and just trying to stay connected, game nights, creative things, book clubs, the same, and with the children as well. It's good for them to stay connected. There's some people have been trying to do virtual play dates where they can get together with their little friends over video and sort of play together and connect that way. Many of us are telecommuting right now, and that can lead to some blurred boundaries between home and work. And many of us are all, watching children and working. So there's a lot of crossover, and it's really helpful to try to develop a routine. If you're fortunate to be able to have a physical space that you could separate, like a room that you can go and work in, at the end of the day, closing the door, leaving the room, if you're able to. If you're not able to, if you're like at your dining room table or your kitchen table or what have you, developing rituals. The one thing that I find helpful is I have a notebook where I keep all my work stuff, and at the end of the day, I close it up, and that's a sign to me that I'm done and moving on to the more family-focused portion of the day. And Zoom fatigue is real. Just stand there. So just be mindful of that. Try to take breaks. Are there meetings or calls that you're able to be outside on, like walk and talk, as opposed to in front on the camera? And then just manage expectations. It can be very challenging, particularly for folks with the really young children, those toddlers. They're real busy. They're into everything, and it's you can figure out what tasks can you get done while you're watching them versus while you're not watching them. Are there, is there another adult in your home who can help trade off? Can you trade off childcare? If someone has a meeting at a certain time, can one person watch the child, the other person switches off? Just thinking creatively about how to manage and balance these various components. So now I'm going to turn it over to Lynn. And Lynn, do you want me to run the slides for you, or do you want to run it from your computer?
If you can keep doing it, that'd be great. So it's, hopefully, if you have not been paying attention to the foundation of well-being and self-care and the various areas of your life in which we all have the potential for taking care of ourselves. hopefully the previous slides were a reminder to tune into those different areas, to think about ways I am taking care of myself, ways perhaps I'm not, and are there ways that I can adjust what I'm doing in order to get a little bit more of what I need. This has been an overused analogy probably at this point, but as a colleague has said plenty of times, when you get on an airplane, they tell you to put your own oxygen mask on first before you help others. It's the same thing with self-care. We have to do things to help ourselves before we try to help others, because we will be used up if we do not take care of ourselves and are continually focusing on others. So we're going to go through 5 strategies that can be done in the moment that you can use when you're feeling particularly agitated or overwhelmed or anxious. One of the things, though, I just want to emphasize about this is if you try them out when you're not feeling particularly overwhelmed or anxious, you'll get a chance to practice it. And then when you actually are in those moments when you're thinking, oh, I really need to do something to take care of myself, you will have tried some different strategies and you might be able to see what works for you in that particular situation. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is how to calm yourself. In this one, you may or may not have done some breathing exercises over time, but this is one that is very simple. You breathe in for a slow count of 4. You hold your breath for a slow count of 4. And then you breathe out for a count of 6. And you repeat that 10 times. The number 10 is not a magic number, but you repeat it several times. The reason why this helps is when we are feeling particularly overwhelmed and anxious, our body is getting very activated. We're becoming very agitated. We may feel our hearts racing. We may feel ourselves breathing hard. We may just feel like we need to run out and do something. And our breathing can get very off. And if that situation continues where our breathing is off compared to what our body actually needs, because most of the times when our body is feeling very agitated and active in that way, we actually aren't expending that extra energy. And so then it leads to a whole cascade of other kinds of physiological responses, which don't help us in the moment with addressing the kinds of situations and problems that we're in. So we can do this breathing strategy that lowers our physiological arousal, and it allows ourselves to then come back into the moment and not have that sort of agitated, overwhelmed, body racing kind of experience, feeling much calmer and able to face what's in front of us. It's a great way to settle down other people as well. I've used this with people who post cardiac surgery to help them feel more comfortable and relaxed. You can do it with all kinds of different age groups. So it's a really easy strategy to use, but try it a few times on your own when you're not feeling particularly overwhelmed, so that when you are in those moments of feeling overwhelmed, you can use it. I personally find this is a good one for me when I'm in traffic and I'm feeling agitated because I'm not going anywhere. So another strategy that we sometimes want to try is, how do we focus our thinking? When we're feeling very stressed and anxious and overwhelmed, we can have 100 different thoughts in our head. We can't really sort through them all to decide what it is we need to focus on and pay attention to. And this may seem a little counterintuitive, but sometimes it's helpful to try to dismiss those thoughts by thinking of a category, animals or food, and try to work your way through the alphabet, naming something that starts with each letter. For instance, if you thought of animals, you might think of an anteater, then you might think of a baboon, then you might think of a chicken, then you might think of a dolphin, and kind of work your way through the alphabet. You might find when you've done that, that maybe some of those racing thoughts have settled down a little bit. You can also do the same thing with walking in mentally into your room and go into your kitchen or your bathroom or your bedroom and start mentally looking around and naming things and visualizing them. Doing an activity like that shifts our brain away from all those racing, distracted thoughts, and then we can return to what is it I'm trying to deal with right here and now. So that can be a way to focus our thinking when it feels like it's just going all over the place. So it's a nice one to try when our thoughts are racing. This is also something to try if you're having difficulty falling asleep and you've got 100 things you're thinking about you need to do. The first thing I would recommend is to write down those things so they're on a piece of paper. But once you've written them down, try one of these things to just take your thinking away from all the big to-do lists and instead just sort of focus on something that's not stressful, not anxiety provoking, and can just settle your thinking away from all the 100 things that are going to be there when you wake up the next day. I love this frog. I wish I could feel that relaxed all the time. One of the things that's really nice to do to help us relax, first we were talking about how to slow our breathing down, to slow down that agitation in our body. When we're feeling really stressed and overwhelmed, our muscles can feel really tense and really tight, and our bodies can just feel not our own. So one thing that can be very helpful is to work through your body, tensing and relaxing muscle groups. I usually have either start at the top of my head and work my way to my toes, or start at my toes and work my way up. So if I was starting with my toes, I might say, okay, I'm going to tense all the muscles in my legs, and I would tense them as much as I can. Hold that tension for 10 seconds. You keep breathing. You don't hold your breath, but you hold the tension in your muscles, and then you release that tension and release it for more than 10 seconds and really concentrate on what it feels like to feel relaxed in your legs and to feel less tension in your legs. And you work your way through your body, your trunk, your arms, your face. You can do those 4 groups, or you can break it down into even smaller groups, like I'm going to tense my toes, I'm going to try to tense my calves. And if there's a part of your body where you particularly feel tension, for many people it's in their neck and shoulders, or it might be in their lower back, sometimes you focus just on that area. Try to tense it up even further and then let it relax, and really focus on what does it feel like to have those muscles unwind and unknot and feel more relaxed. And that can be a wonderful way to try to get rid of a little bit of the tension that you might be experiencing in your body. Another strategy that we often try, I don't know if this happens to you at all, but sometimes things just feel like I'm going a mile a minute and I'm thinking of 100 things I need to do in the future. I've got all kinds of things happening around me. I'm not really paying attention to what's happening in the moment. And sometimes we just need to slow down and ground ourselves and figure out what's happening in the moment. One way to do that is to just stop, pay attention to what our body is doing. Notice the air. Notice the surfaces. What do your clothes feel like against your body? Can you smell anything? What do you see? When you close your eyes, do you feel the sensations more strongly? Do you feel different textures? Can you feel the temperature of the air on your skin? And sometimes grounding yourself like that takes you out of all the worries of the past and the future and gets you right here in the moment. And that's where we need to be sometimes. We need to be right here in the moment, whether it's with the person we're with, the problem we're addressing, or just enjoying those moments when we don't have other pressures and we can look around and appreciate hearing a bird song, or a bright sunny day, or seeing a wonderful vista, or hearing the laughter of children. So grounding ourselves and getting ourselves right here where we are can be incredibly important. This also can be really important if you're going into a big presentation and you're really nervous about what's going to happen. If you do this kind of grounding technique ahead of time, that may lower your overall anxiety about the presentation and allow you to just go in and do the work that you're doing. Or if you've been racing from one activity to the next, if you do a grounding technique like this, you may slow down that racing and then be able to focus more completely on the thing that you're facing right now, as opposed to 15 steps ahead. And then the final strategy that we really encourage everyone to do, think about things that went well today. And if they involved another person, recognize that person and thank them whenever possible for what they did. The data is really clear that gratitude enhances our overall well-being. When we have a lot of demands on ourselves, it can sometimes be hard for us to slow down and think about the positive things. And when life doesn't feel like it's going the way we want it to, whether we're overwhelmed with work possibilities or whether we've been laid off because of challenges with the economy, or we're very distressed about what's happening with COVID and the people we care about, or whether we're really concerned about the economic impact, or whether it's something unrelated to COVID altogether, like the recent floods in Michigan and the impact that has on the local communities. All of that can be very overwhelming, and it can be very easy to focus on all the things that aren't going well and all the negatives that are happening. But it's very clear that when we work to also recognize the positives, we do better. Mentally, we do better. Emotionally, we do better. And it's wonderful if we can develop a sense of gratitude about those things. It's very clear from a mental health perspective that when we cultivate a sense of gratitude, we overall are developing a healthier sense of interacting and being with others. And it's so wonderful when we can share that with others. So sometimes the things that went well today are small. It could be my first cup of coffee tasted delicious and I was so happy to have that this morning. Or it could be my kid actually picked up his dirty clothes and got them to the laundry basket without me having to tell him to do that. Or it could be you're really grateful for something that happened at work, or something that happened at with a colleague, and you want to just let them know that it was a good thing. People really appreciate being recognized. Sometimes we have to do it for ourselves. This one's particularly important if we're starting to feel sort of depressed and down, because it's so easy to remember everything that doesn't go well. But when we are able to remember the things that go well and celebrate those, and somebody just posted in the chat, keeping a journal about this, and that's absolutely true, writing down the positives reinforces it for us and helps us remember those things. Because some people are much better at telling you everything that didn't go well. So reminding yourself about what did go well, what was positive, is very beneficial to us, and an excellent habit to cultivate. So those were 5 key strategies we talked about: breathing, grounding, distracting yourself, then use to refocus, the muscle relaxation, and celebrating the positives. All things that you can do for yourself, that you can adapt with your family, that you can use with the people you work with. There are lots of ways that you can use that to sort of expand that self-care and well-being. Because right now we know, for people who are experiencing quarantine, that quarantine fatigue is no joke. It's real. People are really struggling with this. And we're seeing this in different ways. For some people, it's been very difficult to spend all this time if they're spending it largely at home for a variety of reasons. For other people, they're heading out into the world and feeling very overwhelmed about what they're contending with when others are not doing those things. For others, there's a whole economic piece wrapped into this. One of the things that's helpful for all of us to bear in mind right now is all of us are making sacrifices of one sort or another. And this is challenging and overwhelming, but when we can keep it in our minds that we're doing this for an overall greater good, that there's a purpose to it and a reason for why we're choosing these safer at home, for why we're choosing to remember to keep our physical distance right now, that really helps. It can give us some perspective on what we're doing and accept that life has changed. That's really a critical one too. If we keep trying to rail against the idea that I just want things back the way they were, well, reality is they probably won't ever be exactly the way they were. There's going to be things that change as a result of this pandemic. So accepting that these changes are happening is going to then give us more emotional space and energy to do the things that we need to do in the moment. So I find it really helpful to think about what we're facing right now as that this is a challenge to be met. It's not a threat I'm trying to overcome. It's a challenge I'm doing my best to meet. And I try to think about what's my foundation for staying strong, and then think about what are the other areas of my well-being I can develop as I need to. So some of you may be in places where where it's not just about your own self-care, but you're thinking about organizations, you're thinking about the people that you work with. If you are in a position of leadership, I strongly encourage you to think about what can I do for my organization, for the people that I work with. Things like good communication from leaders about what's needed. How do I let people know what our decision making is, what our timelines are going to be, what kinds of things that we have in place for us. For people who are working in places where they're working with people on the front lines, whether they're providing healthcare, other kinds of needs, I think it's really critical if we can think about how do we support those individuals to do the best that they can do. So you may be more behind the scenes. What can you do on the front lines? Are there things like ensuring that there's meals available for people, that people have access to whatever equipment it is that they need? These are all things that are really important for organizations to be doing. We want to try to capture when people are feeling overwhelmed before they become to the point where it's a crisis. So there are various support groups and what we might call warm lines that are available to provide support to frontline healthcare workers, to others that are out there and available. The crisis text line has been getting lots and lots of texts, hundreds, the significant increase more, as are local 311s and other kinds of information. So there are resources available when we're feeling particularly distressed and overwhelmed. It's hard to think about that, but there are ways to try to find that. And then increasingly we're seeing the possibility of brief interventions. And then of course, for people who are really developing some mental health challenges right now, psychotherapy is certainly an option. And we can talk more about that as it's relevant to folks on the call, but certainly most psychologists and other mental health professionals are figuring out how to deliver care via technology. So it's more Zoom time, more video conferencing, but we know that it can be very effective and helpful. So there is a line of things that can happen when people are really becoming to the point of overwhelmed and are not functioning well. And I want to just put it out there that that's a very valid and important thing to do. So I talked a little bit before about organizational support. If you, again, are in those situations where you have the opportunity to take care of employees or a community, where you're a leader in a community, whether it's through a church organization, through the organization you work for, wherever, trying to do the things to set up care for that group of people before a crisis is always wonderful. But that doesn't happen for everybody before the crisis happens. So we've got to make sure that we're meeting the needs of people right there in the front, and that we reduce risks within the organization so that crises don't escalate. And we're seeing in the places where organizational leadership has done these things, hospitals where basic needs are being met, that people have appropriate compensation, risks are reduced, the staff have better health outcomes, mental health outcomes and physical health outcomes. This is applicable across all organizations. The more that we can do to provide support across the organization, the more that the individuals affiliated with that are going to have better outcomes. They're just going to do better if their needs are taken care of from the beginning. That matters in the home, it matters in work settings, it matters in community organizations. So we want to think about that across all the areas in which we engage. And if you're in a position where you're working with others and you're trying to think about how can I support them and help them, some of the psychological skills that we're working for as parents and as leaders and as a supervisor, one of the things that I'm always thinking about, with my own family, with the people I work with, I'm always trying to help people be a little more flexible in how they're approaching situations and how to be resilient when they're facing tough times. So one of the first things that we can do in those situations is to listen and validate what people are experiencing. Offer some reality. Yeah, that really stinks what you just had to deal with. Sorry that that's what's going on. I totally hear you. Being validated really matters. It helps for teenagers, it helps for colleagues. So if you're in a position to do that, that's a helpful thing to do. if you know someone's particularly overwhelmed, sort of you've taken care of yourself and now you're thinking about how to help others, ensure their basic needs are met. See if you can connect them to information and services. Sometimes we need to talk to other people to sort of manage our emotional reactions and our responses to things. Sometimes it helps to have a second ear for those kinds of things. Am I overreacting to this? Or how could I think about this differently? And try to help people develop positive thinking patterns and attitudes around that. We talked about that with the gratitude and celebrating the positives, but it can be very helpful to help work with somebody else to help them think about positive thinking. One of the challenges when we're feeling distressed and overwhelmed is sometimes it just feels like there's too many things to do. So to the extent that we can help others prioritize what's important and what do they need to work on, that's very helpful. Can help people with problem solving. And there's sort of two things that you want to think about when you're prioritizing. You're thinking both about what's important and what's urgent. So there's some things that are urgent that may not be all that important. So try to dispense with those and stick with the important and urgent things. Then there's some things that are important, but perhaps not as urgent. And the stuff that doesn't seem to be very important or urgent should definitely be lower on the list, or even things that we let go of, particularly in times when we're overwhelmed. So it can be very helpful to even just start with those two questions when you're feeling overwhelmed or when you're working with somebody who's feeling overwhelmed, to have them think about, well, what's important here, what's urgent? Let's focus our energies there first. And are there ways that we can get there? Because our end goal is to really think about how can we cope with the situation that we're in. We probably can't change everything about the current situation, but there may be things about how we're responding and reacting to it that we can change. And these are some basic starting points for trying to develop that greater flexibility and resilience in tough times. So we've got several resources at APA that have to do with self-care. Some of them focused for individuals, some of them focused for healthcare providers, some of them focused specifically for psychologists. I don't know what everyone's backgrounds are on this webinar and the kinds of groups that you're working with and where your particular interests are. But we've also got things related to work and telework and things related to physical distancing and isolation. One point about that that's really important is we know isolation has linked to negative mental health outcomes for many individuals, particularly older adults. So the more that we can do to help individuals who are feeling physically isolated not develop loneliness can be really important, and think about that. And then, you know, to the extent that we can, I know it's not possible for everyone, nature really has some benefits. And then we've got some really good connections here for children and teens and other kinds of resources that we'd want to share with you. And then the slides are going to be available to everybody, so you can access these links. There's so much content out there. Sometimes it's hard to find good content that you want to share, but hopefully we've identified a few things that are relevant for where you are and what you need. And we encourage you to share these things with family, colleagues, and whoever would be helpful to share that with. So that's our formal presentation, and we know that there have been some questions that have come in, and I think Raquel's going to answer the first one, and then we'll try to track the other kinds of questions that are coming in. I think we're both going to put our cameras on so you can see us, but I'm not sure how that's going to work with such a large group.
Sure, I just turned off my screen share, so hopefully everyone's seeing okay. So yeah, thank you, Lynn. So first, we got a number of questions about resources, and so I would encourage you to look at those last few slides in the presentation. We have links to a bunch of resources there. I know that the slides will be shared with you following the presentation. And then also, you know, APA's website, we have a COVID-19 resources page, really, really wonderful information hub right there. And those resources have been vetted to see, you know, which are some good ones. Some of them are APA specific and some of them are outside of APA. So I would definitely encourage those of you who are asking for more resources to look at the slides as well as APA's site. And on that, one of the last slides, you see the link there for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. they have wonderful resources there. That was just a link to one, but it's when you actually go to the website, there's tons of resources you can click through, little books for children, just really having conversations with children, just really some really great stuff on there. So that was the resources question. And then one of the other questions we got before the webinar was about working with families. I think this was from the peer perspective, working with families and how to know or when there's a risk of self-harm or suicide and sort of what to do. So I would say, you know, two things really. So first off, you know, just be alert to signs and signals. So, you know, are they talking? Are there, you know, parents or children talking about self-harm? Are they expressing hopelessness for the future? Have you seen a significant change in behavior? Not specifically, we've all had changes in behavior, right, with the quarantine, but really more dramatic changes in behavior, not reaching out for social connections, changes in mood, changes in substance use, some of these real basic things, starting to give away prized possessions, saying goodbyes. So just being alert to these potential signals. But then really the big one is, if you're wondering, if you're not sure, ask. And that's a conversation that can be really uncomfortable, you know, especially at first. But really, if there was any question of it, just ask, you know, hey, I've been noticing this. Are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? And just let that conversation that can develop from there, even though it feels uncomfortable. And there's really 3 things on the suicide risk that you want to pay attention to. So number one is there ideation? So are they thinking, are they having these thoughts of self-harm or hurting themselves? Number 2, do they have a plan? Do they have a plan mapped out for how they would do it? And then also access. And then 3, intention. So are they going to, maybe they have a plan, but they have no intention of carrying it out. So they have intention to carry it out, and have this conversation, ask those uncomfortable questions. And also, you know, pay attention to the access to resources. So if someone says, you know, they're thinking of it and they have a plan, let's say they're going to use a gun and they want to carry it, do they have access to a gun? Do they have access to the resource that, those are the things to really pay attention to. And then from that point, you can move forward with intervening as necessary or not. So that was you want to add something, Lynn?
Well, I'm already seeing some comments and questions pop up in the chat. Am I causing feedback? I don't think so. So I'm seeing comments and questions popping up in the chat. And you guys have great ideas for one another as well. One of the things that I would encourage for those of you with staff with children that you're trying to figure out, how do I work with everybody? One person commented that they're doing a lot by keeping in touch with people via text and having a bi-weekly conference call. If you've got staff who also are dealing with children in the house, think about how you can work with them so that their schedules can adjust, so that if they have to attend to school duties during a certain time period, can they change their work day in such a way to give them a little more flexibility so that they are able to work, you know, from 4 to 6, or if normal work hours would have ended by then, you know, whatever works in a way to meet the needs of the organization, as opposed to really being stuck on the time frame of what typical work hours are, because they're dealing with a lot of challenges right now. Having those kinds of conversations with what would help in order for you to be able to do the work that you need to do is a great question as a supervisor to ask people that you're working with. Some people in the team that I work with, there are a couple of people who live alone. They love to have the video conferences. Mm-hmm. We're all on telework. They don't see other people very often. They really want video conferences and video phone calls. Other people care less about that and really want to have a time they need to talk to me. It might be to walk around the block while they're talking because they haven't been outside at all and they've been staring at a screen all day. So really think about how you can connect with the people on your team in a way that works for them and works with the kind of schedule that they're dealing with. If you are a supervisor, one thing I really encourage you doing is try very hard to at least communicate to your team that if you're sending emails outside of regular work hours, you're not expecting them to respond to them during those time frames. I certainly have not figured out how to program my emails so they all go out at 8:30 in the morning. If I've been working the night before, I know people who do that. But I try to make really clear to the people I work with that just because I'm sending email at 9 p.m. does not mean I'm expecting you to be on your email and responding to me. To the extent that you are able to help support boundaries for your team in a time when work and home seem so fluid for people who are teleworking, please do so, because you are modeling it then for the people that you're working with in whatever way you can. I was able to open the chat, so I'm trying to keep sense of what's there. Lots of the things.
I'm trying to figure out which is the next question. There's so many chats coming through.
I also want to give credit to our colleague Jacob, who helped us find all the great pictures. To the extent that you can, let the people work to their strengths, right? And his is putting together great slides for us, so that's been wonderful.
And I have to give a shout out. One of my former mentors is on the call, Professor Aries. Hello.
It looks like a lot of people are finding boundaries to be really important. One thing that Raquel and we should probably, we work together all the time. We never go with Dr. Halfond and Dr. Bufka, but one thing that Raquel talked about, but I want to underscore to the extent that you can, and for those of you who I see backgrounds for, I'm not seeing bedrooms, but try very hard not to work in your bedroom. When you do that, that starts to connect your bedroom with things other than sleep. And you really want to make sure that your bedroom is about sleep or intimacy, physical intimacy with your partner. That's good too. But you don't want to associate your bedroom with work, because that's not going to be terribly relaxing. Not everyone has that opportunity to separate their space like that. They may live in a very small space. So if possible, at least have a desk or a chair set aside for the work, not the bed itself. So encouraging people to do that, because otherwise it can really connect sleep. It can disrupt your sleep patterns. So, and that's one of the things that I think most of us can struggle with when our lives and our routines get disrupted. So keeping a good sleep pattern is good. If other people are watching the chat, your colleagues have great comments in here. Looking at how do you support parent leaders who are wearing many hats? Can you suggest an activity they can use with their support group members to keep positive energy and hope? And I would suspect those of you who are on the webinar, some of you are doing this already and doing those kinds of things. But there may be things that you can do to try to have ways to pair people in ways to, I remember years ago I was in a group and we were randomly paired with somebody else in the group, but we were told we were paired because we had a special thing in common. And so we had to find that out. And it was such an interesting challenge because we all then found something in common. It brought the group a little closer together and helped us understand each other. You could play on that, where you could potentially say something about how could you pair people together and think about it and get them to think about, is there something positive that you want to convey to this person that you think is unrecognized about them? So if Raquel and I were paired together, my task might be to identify something that I admire or appreciate about Raquel, but I don't always tell her. So you could pair your parent support leaders in that kind of way as well, to encourage them to verbalize the things. How often do we say things, do we tell people about the things that aren't going well? but we don't always do the things to let them know what is going well. So set up opportunities to get them to do that, to help them encourage how to provide that feedback to one another in a way that maybe they haven't. Because right now it can feel very hard to think about where are we headed. If you're really stuck on thinking about, oh my gosh, when is this going to end? I'm so overwhelmed, I don't know what to do. Try not to think about what the end time is. Think about today and what I'm going to get done. Or maybe you can think about it in week-long chunks or in 2-week-long chunks. You don't have to think about all of it as being, I have to resolve all of this now. I have to have a grand plan that's going to work. None of us do. But figure out what time period works for you to plan for, or with your team to help your team think about how do they best cope and work on things.
And another idea, many of you have probably heard of a gratitude journal. But you can take this a step up and make it social. You can have a gratitude accountability buddy. So you link up people in the support group, and they have to maybe like once a day or a couple times a week or something check in and sort of and say something that they're grateful for to promote that that positive mental health.
So I love the things that we can do at home or as a family. I don't know about you guys. I've actually played Simon Says with my godchildren who live in another country. So that was a lot of fun. We did that over Zoom one time. I've learned, my father is legally blind, and so video stuff is a little bit hard for him, but there's a card game that we both enjoy playing, and we have figured out how to play that over the phone, because when we play cards together, we have to say our cards out loud anyway. We play cribbage. If you know how to play cribbage, you know that each person, if you're playing just 2 people, only has 6 cards. We decided it wasn't that big a deal if we each had our own deck of cards and we were comparing. So there are things like that that with a little creativity, you can figure out how to adapt. Not everything has to be video, video, video in order to engage with others that are around you. And I'm not seeing additional questions coming in, but I'm seeing lots of great ideas. So I hope that somebody on the organization end is trying to capture some of these things.
Yes, we are. Thank you so much, Dr. Halfond and Dr. Bufka. We really appreciate all the terrific information that you have shared today, and just your time and all these wonderful resources. Everybody who's on the call, please know we will be sending out a link to the recording as well as the slides. I've had at least one person ask if we can capture the chat. I think that we can do that, and we'll be sure also to add a slide at the end that includes some of the links and resources that were shared in there. So we'll try to get all of this information to you in the most succinct way possible. Again, just want to thank you all so much and the APA for your time and your expertise. We really appreciate your partnership. We hope that everyone who's joined us today has learned at least one great thing they can take back into their homes and into the field. And we really thank you all for spending this part of your day with us.
And thank you for everything you do in your work. We all are trying to make a little difference with the lives that we touch. So I really appreciate everything that you all are doing as well.
Thank you very much for having us.
Absolutely. You made me smile, so that made my day. All right, everyone, be well, take care. Please let us know if you need anything. You'll get an email from me either later today or tomorrow.